Many years ago, one of my professors at McGill University made a great statement, and I don't have it as an exact quote, but I'm 99% right, I think. Doug Hall said, "Jesus came proclaiming the realm of God, and the church rushed out and set up a toll booth." Isn't that good? Jesus proclaimed the realm of God, and we went up and basically put rules around it. I love this interpretation that Eugene Peterson gives in the Message of the passage from Romans, where Paul is so wordy. Paul really needs a good editor, but there we are. But Paul is trying to point out that Abraham jumped into God's promise with absolutely no reason. And that's why God was pleased with Abraham. And I looked at several translations trying to choose one for this morning, and I ended up going with the Message because I loved the verse in there where it says, God didn't choose Abraham because he was living like a saint. God chose him to make a somebody out of a nobody. Of all the different things that come through in that passage, and there's a lot of good stuff in there, I really want to focus on that because I think that's so powerful. God made us somebody out of a nobody. Because you see, sometimes, way too often, we do the opposite. We set up the toll booth. God offers new life, and we somehow try and contract it. We shrink it. We try and limit it. And God keeps saying, no, it's about grace. And it's about grace for everybody. A couple of stories. First one is about the singer Mary Lambert. Do we have any Mary Lambert fans here? Oh, you guys are as bad as the 8:30 folks. Mary Lambert. Remember that name? She's really good. She's an amazing singer. She's a Christian singer from Seattle. And worth checking out on iTunes. Now, Mary Lambert's an interesting person. A lot of people don't realize that she's a Christian, and part of that is because Mary Lambert has an awful lot of tattoos. And many people don't think tattoos, especially on a woman somehow connect with also being Christian. Mary also has a mouth on her that would embarrass a convention of truck drivers. She, you don't want to play a lot of her songs in front of your mother. And she doesn't apologize for that. Mary shoots from the hip, and she just talks bluntly and sings bluntly. But she makes really wonderful points in her songs and shares wonderful, wonderful messages. And she sings a lot about the fact that she grew up in a horrendous home full of abuse. Her father sexually and physically and mentally abused her virtually from day one. And when he finally left, a stepfather came in and basically continued the same work. And it left Mary, as she was a teenager, it left her feeling like she was an absolutely worthless piece of nothing. And she became an alcoholic and an active drug addict, which is not a huge surprise when you've been that mistreated. But somehow, through the grace of God and who knows what all else, Mary wandered into a church in West Seattle one day. She wandered into big, huge church. And they embraced her. They loved her. They accepted her. They said to her, "You're not a nobody, you're a somebody." And she thought, this is incredible. This is the home, this is the family I've been looking for. And okay, we're not related, but this is a group of people who are accepting me and loving me, and this is just fantastic. And she kept going back to that church, and some of the very angry veneer started to kind of fade away. And she started to trust a little. And she started to feel like maybe she really could belong. She was loving this church so much, one Sunday she talked her girlfriend into going with her. And they were asked to leave. And Mary's absolutely stunned. She's like, "Oh, this is my new family. What do you mean?" And they said, "Leave her, Repent of your filthy, disgusting lifestyle, and we'll gladly embrace you again. They walked away. And Mary became very, very hardened and got this feeling, see, I knew this. I knew that all Christians were horrible people who put limits on God's love, and this is just horrible. And this is what Christianity is all about. And you know, as bad as my family, families are supposed to be loving, you know, and she got very, very angry. Sometime later, a couple of weeks later, again, grace of God. I love how the grace of God works. She's sitting in Starbucks down at Alki Beach in West Seattle, and she starts crying, and this woman who's sitting there in Starbucks goes over just to say, you know, you doing okay? And they get talking, and she shares her experience of going to that church. And the person that did it was Diane Darling. She's a United Church of Christ minister. And she just listened to Mary, and Mary talked a lot and a lot and a lot, and had another, you know, venti coffee each, and she kept talking and spilling all of this story, and Diane didn't interrupt. Until finally, when it felt like Mary had spewed all that she needed to spew, and Diane said, they lied to you. God does love you. God does welcome you. You are a somebody. And when they told you weren't, they were lying. And Mary got involved in Diane's church and discovered that, yeah, there really was real community as well as false community that put limits on God. One of the things that Diane also said to Mary, Diane told me later, was she had said to her, yeah, we would welcome an axe murderer. We would make them leave their axe at the door, but we would welcome them because God would welcome them. And that's the key piece. God told Abraham that he wasn't a nobody, he was a somebody. Because that's what our God does, probably more than anything else. I don't know about any of you. Maybe you're an exception, but I have occasionally in my life felt like a nobody. Perhaps you have too. Just going out on a limb there. There are those times when you think, I'm worthless, I'm stupid, I'm dumb, nobody likes me, life is, you know, bad, I can't do this very well, I can't do that I can't do anything very well. And those are the moments when God says, you're okay. Not Superman, but you're okay. In one of Mary Lambert's songs, she has this wonderful line where she says, you're just sitting by the phone waiting for someone to call up and say that you did good. You did good. And it never happens. That was the experience in her family. She was so eager to say that she was beginning to feel in the Christian church that maybe somebody thought she did do good. Abraham and Sarah are old when they leave Ur, which is somewhere in eastern Iraq, and they go to Palestine, or the land of Canaan as it was known in those days. And the Bible gives us a story, a good story, about Abraham and Sarah. And there's no reason to doubt it. It's pretty believable. One of the pieces that we tend to do with it, though, is we tend to think that it's just this elderly couple traveling. And it's important to notice they take a lot of people with them. And this is not uncommon. You know, villages basically would pack up and move. And so they do that. They take some nieces and nephews and their kids and a lot of animals, and off they go. And it takes them a long time to get there. Weeks, months, perhaps years. It's a long journey. It's a lot of people to kind of coordinate, you know, and there's no bus involved. And finally they get there, but there's someone that they don't take with them, and that's their own children. And it's because they don't have any. And this is a very important part of this story, as the story is given to us. Abraham's 100 years old. I'm guessing, frankly, like most biblical ages, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, kind of rounded off. I'm guessing not quite 100, but I could be wrong. Sarah's 90. The point here is they are well beyond the time of getting all excited about having a baby. You know, that moment is way back there. And God comes along and says, so you're going to have a child. It is no surprise that they laugh. And just for the record, if you read the story in Genesis, both Abraham and Sarah laugh. We're really used to the part of Sarah laughing. Tradition has often left out the piece about Abraham laughing because we want to paint him in a better light. But Abraham laughs first. This is ludicrous, God, with all due respect. I am 100, she's 90. We're not going to have a baby. But then they do. The first child that they have is Abraham and Hagar, who is Sarah's servant. Now, no one would have thought there was anything inappropriate about that. If your wife said, sleep with my servant, you were allowed to do that. I'm not defending it, but it was, considered normal in those days. So Abraham and Hagar sleep together, and she gives birth to Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn son. And Abraham is so excited because now he has an heir. And that's so important in that time and in that culture. And God said, yeah, you missed part of the memo. I said you and Sarah were going to have a child. And I'm sure, this isn't in the story, but I'm sure Abraham said, yeah, I know. And Sarah gave me her servant. And so it's basically Sarah's child, for heaven's sake. It's adopted. And everything's fine. Everything's good, God. We've got the child. And God says, no. The two of you will have one. Sarah laughs again. And then she has a child. So Isaac is born. So Abraham has two sons, his firstborn, Ishmael, and then Isaac. And then something funny happens. The story gets very limited. Hagar and Ishmael get sent away, and basically they disappear off the stage. And we read the story of Isaac and Isaac's descendants and their descendants and so on 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 and so on. So it's fascinating then to read this passage in Romans where Paul's writing to the church and he said, yeah, remember, we have always known this. God said Abraham would be the father of many nations. And we've always read that in a very narrow way, that the nations are Isaac and then Isaac's children and his children's children and his children's 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 children. But there's no logical reason to read it that way. There really isn't. We do that. Tradition has done that for years. Abraham's the father of many nations. He's the father of a bunch of nations through Isaac and a bunch of nations through Ishmael. There's only a huge problem with that. The problem is we know that the descendants of Isaac are the Jews, and we know that the descendants of Ishmael are the Arabs. Need I say much more? It's not been a good history. And so we read a very narrow version of the history, and we leave out the children of Ishmael because, well, they're not nearly as important as the somebodies over here. By default, they must be some nobodies over there. God doesn't do that. And Paul, when he's writing to the Romans, keeps pointing out Abraham's the father of multiple nations, of many people. And he tells us that Abraham finds favor with God. God takes Abraham, who thinks he's a nobody, and he makes him into a somebody. Because that's what God does. We need to be very careful. We need to be very careful as we celebrate our somebodyness. It's not a word, but work with me. We celebrate our somebodyness that God gives to us through grace. And then it's too easy to turn around and leave some other people in the nobody column. God doesn't do that. God has made us all somebodies. And no matter where we are, no matter what we do, and no matter what's happening in the world around us, when we feel like a nobody, God's gentle voice comes along and says, no, you are somebody. You are okay. You did good. We as followers of Jesus Christ, who has so widely opened up the door of God's grace to all people, need to make sure that we don't fall into the habits and the traditions of leaving people out. God's vision is to broaden and to widen and to welcome with the widest of widest open arms. That is good news. Let us celebrate that. And let us make sure we celebrate that by letting others know that they're all somebodies. Amen.